There are 7 ways for sports car racers to pay for their climb up the motorsports ladder, from entry level to professional racing. There are fewer paths for open wheel, but perhaps you prefer to be an F1 or an IndyCar driver versus a top-tier sports car driver. While sports car racing may not be as attractive as open wheel racing for some, it's more viable, more likely for someone without tons of family money to make it to the top. You should know the 7 different paths to continuing your sports car racing career to see what may be the right path to attempt and to put your time, effort, and resources into. The first path, and the most predominant, which we are all aware. The racers pay for themselves, or their family does. Of course, the teenagers and most in their early 20s have family help. This is how I raced when I was a teenager, along with getting some financial support from sponsors. The family help often stops after a year or 2 in professional racing, as the cost continues to rise into the high 6 figures, if not millions. Some wealthy families stop spending the money for a variety of reasons. However, for those very few with great talent and continued family backing, they continue their pursuit of a top-tier pro racing career, which can offer an unbelievable life. The second way, leveraging your audience. For those not named Jimmy Broadbent, Super GT, or Lindsey Brewer, who have built significant social media audience to create value in themselves, racers instead contact the racing series they want to compete in to ask for their audience information. The demographics, the numbers, how old the audience watching the series is, how many watch, what's their income, what gender, and more. Then the racer puts this information into a proposal and sends to companies in hopes the companies see value in those statistics. In my experience, racers often put the cost of the sponsorship proposal at the end of the PDF, which happens to be the cost of their racing program. But that's not the value of the sponsorship program. The value is less, typically, and is determined by the sponsor, what it is willing and able to pay. The racer often does not know the value and did not try to determine what the sponsor may see as the value, or when the sponsor needs to make the buying decision based on its fiscal year, when the budget is available, and during the time frame it makes sponsorship decisions. While the racer often does a good job asking questions of the series, they fall short of asking the company questions before proposing a sponsorship deal. Very difficult, though, for a teenager or someone in his or her early 20s, and very timely. It takes a lot of time, which must start months before you need the sponsorship money for your racing series. Racing Prodigy does not sell sponsorships at the levels we need for racing. We sell much less, what it's worth, and we find additional ways to fund the racing activities. So should you. So you have a desire to race, a need for money, and maybe an opportunity to better understand how to gain sponsors. So racers often then turn to a third path, agencies or sponsorship agents. Unfortunately, rarely do I see these work out for racers early in their motorsports careers, even at the entry to mid-level pro racing tiers. And that's because it goes back to the cost of racing being higher than the value given to sponsors or even multiple sponsors in an effort to ask for less from any one of them. While agents can deliver, and I know some have, I've got more awareness of it working when the racer had 1 million+ followers on social media. The value of that audience and the connection the racer has with it is typically more valuable than the audience of the racing series, the VIP passes to an entry or mid-level pro racing series, decals on the car, and suit, transporter, and more. When grassroots racers want to move to entry-level pro racing, and they ask me about agencies, unless they've got hundreds of thousands or more social media followers, or something else of great value, I always caution them. And when the racer says he or she is marketable, I tell them that most racers say that and it's not working for them. Some drivers recognize that selling eyeballs or audience is a losing game, even with an agent. And they are doing this on your dime. Yes, likely spending time on your behalf, so you better have a real value proposition and pick the right agent, not the first that offers help for a paycheck. The fourth path, creating business-to-business deals. An example of a B2B deal. You know a hotel chain who buys products such as soap. You know a soap distributor who sells to hotels, but not to this one. If you get the hotel chain to switch soap providers, you could get, for example, a small percentage of the revenue or profit from the soap distributor to put towards your racing. You're essentially a salesperson or a connector. You could offer a little extra value to the hotel chain by adding its logo to your car, suit, transporter, social media posts, and more, but recognize that is only worth so much, as we have discussed. You could do the same for the soap distributor, and maybe you generate enough to go racing. Maybe. This is very difficult to do, and it's timely. I have seen one young racer, Alex Berg, make this work well multiple times. He's the son of Alan Berg, who competed in Formula One. Alex was taught about the importance of creating value for companies at a very young age. Alex was putting together deals when he was a Mazda factory driver at age 14 and even earlier. He's rare. Some drivers I know have taken the fifth path. They build their own race team. Some racers had enough money, time, and interest to learn how to build their own race team, how to build their own race car, to prep it, to maintain it, to set it up, to transport it, to read and master the competition rules, learn to build a winning race car, and learn how to drive it, how to study and prep for a racetrack, how to pull and read the data after the on-track sessions, and more. Building this skill set takes years of dedication and often help from others, such as a parent. Some in sports car racing get asked by other racers to help them, or they offer help. And the racer with the skill set to help someone else, to get better, to compete, to potentially win, is valuable. And because this is of value, there are people willing to pay. Some racers form a small race team to start, often with 1 or 2 paying customers. They manage the cars and coach the drivers. Perhaps team up on track in practice or qualifying, even the race, depending on the client's qualifying results and speed. You may be racing for free as a result or close to it. You do well, you buy a bigger, nicer trailer, canopy, and more. Get some help from another mechanic, and your team grows, as does your income. You're racing for free and maybe even making a little bit of money. Maybe. But this too is not for everyone, of course, especially for the open wheel teams. It will likely take years to earn trust of other racers in the paddock, to pay you to build their race car, to manage it, to prep it, to transport it, to nail the setup, and likely coach them. A team owner often does it all at the lower levels, though sometimes hires an engineer coach, but more you outsource or hire, the lower your own profit or take. More you can handle the work, which means long days and not much else. More money you can bring in and perhaps race yourself. Several team owners in the Mazda MX-5 Cup Pro Series, for example, have also competed in the series. They are front runners and can coach, set up a car more. Rather than a company paying the bill, other drivers do. The sixth path, racing scholarships and factory racing seats. In North America, the car manufacturer that does the most with awarding advancement scholarships to racers is Mazda. BMW and Porsche do a lot relative to the others as well. In 2020, while I was at Mazda, we created a shootout competition for karters to compete in sports car racing, the Spec MX-5 Challenge Series. A great series, and Max Pappas, who is a judge for Racing Prodigy, helped me judge the shootout, awarding 2 karters with scholarships. Mazda has another shootout competition that now awards 3 drivers with scholarships to progress to its pro racing series, the MX-5 Cup, which is an unbelievably competitive, fun to watch pro racing series. To earn a scholarship for MX-5 Cup, you need to compete in club racing in the US and in a Mazda. NASCAR has a Drive for Diversity scholarship program, which offers the most support in the US for a scholarship that I'm aware of. These types of scholarships are few and far between and require racers to already prove they have the stuff in a real race car on a real racetrack. Of course, there have been and are still opportunities to earn a real racing seat through sim racing competitions. Until Racing Prodigy, and we have some work to do, those scholarships bought you only so long behind the wheel. Then you have to figure out how to make one of the first 5 paths to funding your racing career work, or the next one. The 7th and final path to funding your racing career is by linking up with what we call in motorsports a gentleman driver? If you don't know the term, it's an important one. Most people in racing have their own money because getting others to pay is tough, as we all know. And most of these individuals are competitive, wanting to improve and to ultimately win. Some of these gentleman drivers, who are generally known to be at least in their 40s, have been very successful in business, owning their own company or an executive at a very large company. Maybe they couldn't afford to race when they were younger, and nor could their families. Our executive chairman is just one. But they worked hard and succeeded in business, enabling them to finally compete in racing. We know in sports car racing, one can compete with other top drivers much later in their lives than you'd find in IndyCar or in F1. Sports car racing often has multiple drivers sharing a race car. Endurance racing is quite popular. Many top younger drivers coach these gentleman drivers, and sometimes these gentleman drivers who can afford to race and also pay for someone to race with them will pay for the younger racer to team up. That way, they have a better chance of winning. And sometimes the rules of the sports car racing class require varying levels of skill to team up. So if the gentleman driver wants to compete and win, he often will need to run with a faster, higher graded driver. That requires the gentleman driver to pay for the younger driver. Unfortunately, it often takes multiple years racing to get to the level where a gentleman driver will select you to coach them and to pay for your racing. And it's important to build a relationship. Many young people in racing don't recognize the importance of building relationships with like-minded people who are passionate about motorsports and have the means. Now, this may seem odd, but when you're in the middle of the activity and your focus is going faster, you may not think about this, especially if, in the moment, your racing is funded. It's hard to look ahead to begin fundraising before you require it. We gave scholarships to many racers, and most did not start trying to generate funds for the next season until the current one that they were in ended because they needed to focus on winning now. Well, you better be able to do both, and you can. When you're at the racetrack, you should be spending more time networking than reviewing your onboard video or data. Do those too, but you better be spending considerable time networking. Coach when you're not racing yourself. Many racers who made it to the top level of sports car racing coached, and still coach, at country club racetracks, as well as at other sanctioned racing events. Coaching other drivers, building that skill set and reputation, is a great way to connect with those who can support your racing. Helping others can go a long way. A bonus, 8th path, for those who have watched this far. If you have the skill and experience to compete at the top level of racing, but you don't have the funding to race in IndyCar, for example, you can travel to the races with your gear in case a driver is unable to compete, but the team needs to put a car on track. Linus Lundqvist, who just signed with a top IndyCar team, has done this. We are big fans of Linus, his work ethic, relationship building skills, and his ability behind the wheel. While the show up with your racing gear approach largely won't work at the lower levels, as the race team does not need to put a car on track if the person who is funding it is not able to race it. But Linus is another great example of dedication that some commit to following their dreams. Making it in racing is tough, but commitment to a path or multiple paths can pay off. For those who break into racing in the first place, we are rooting you on and trying to do our part by providing another path, the Eat a Real path, where it's not about raising your own funds. You can support this 9th path by subscribing to our social channels, enter tournaments, and root your fellow racers on when they pursue their dreams of becoming a professional, sustainable racing driver.